As part of the Wallace Foundation's Building Arts Audiences Initiative, APAP held focus groups in late 2018, seeking to learn more about the unique needs, priorities, and challenges of small and mid-sized presenters as it relates to building audiences. In this webinar, we'll share our findings on sustainability, audience building, and community engagement, and hear directly from presenters who attended the focus groups. The findings from this formative study can be found in a report titled Small and Mid-Sized Presenters in the United States, Stories and Perspectives. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Callahan, who is the founder of Callahan Consulting for the Arts, and both the researcher for this study and the author of the formative report. Callahan Consulting for the Arts helps artists, arts organizations, and funders realize their vision through services including strategic planning development, evaluation, research, and philanthropic counsel. So let's move into our discussion. I want to set the tone and share some background about the study. Realizing that presenting is not a one-size-fits-all work, we noticed at APAP that not all the resources that we were sharing to the field resonated for all presenters. In response, we took a preliminary study to begin learning about the realities and needs of small and mid-sized presenters, many of whom operate in rural areas. The goal of the research was to explore issues impacting the work of these presenters, particularly their efforts to build and engage audiences in their communities. Those interviews illuminated their circumstances and offered insights for us in the field when it was shared in January 2019 in 2 standing room only packed sessions. Because this study is formative, we know that its findings cannot be applied broadly to draw conclusions about the presenting field or all small and mid-sized presenters, but there will be more to the story as the research continues this year and next. Let me introduce our speakers and then we'll get started. Lynn Creamer is the Artistic Director of Carnegie Hall in Lewisburg, West Virginia. She has worked at Carnegie for 19 years in many capacities and has been the Artistic Director since 2004. Formerly a textile artist, Lynn has held several leadership positions, in West Virginia organizations, including serving as president of the West Virginia Arts Presenters Group. Joshua Steele is the manager of Memorial Hall in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was included in the 10 who are advancing the arts by the Cincinnati Enquirer. He founded the theater company New Stage Collective, and he is an active performer, voice instructor, and playwright. So now I'll hand it over to Suzanne to lead today's conversation. Suzanne?
Thank you, Krista, very much. We're going to take just a moment to shift over the presentations, and if the magic of technology works, you should now see my slides on screen. Can I confirm that the slides are visible?
Yep, we see them.
Excellent, thank you. So again, it's great to be here. I am going to talk today about the what and how of the study, as well as the 5 key findings. But I did first want to acknowledge the 19 voices that were part of this study, and also looks like the 30 or so of you that have signed on already today, and I'm sure that there will be more as we get started, and encourage you to share your thoughts. Before we jump into the information, could I ask Robbie or Caitlin from Arts Presenters to share the link to the report in case anybody would like to take a look at that, just know where it is. So with that, moving on to the what or how of the study, or what and how I should say. The things we were looking to learn through doing this research was the context these days in which the small and mid-sized presenters were operating, including any assumptions about the way they do their work that needed to be dispelled. We were interested in finding out changes not only within their organizations, but within their broader communities that they may have experienced, as well as, broadly speaking, any needs, particularly those that arts presenters may be able to address in their own work. So in order to begin finding out more, we convened 3 focus groups. 2 took place at WA, the Western Arts Alliance, in conjunction with their conference, and one at Arts Midwest. We did add some additional interviews of presenters who were both independent and located in the South to round out the perspectives. And here is, I'm sorry, sorry guys, having a little technical issue. My slides aren't, there we go. Now they're advancing. here is the composite group of the 19 voices that were represented within the study. You see on the pie chart on the left, the green indicates that just a little less than half were independent organizations, and about half operate out of larger institutions, including colleges and governments. And on the right, regarding their budget sizes, there was a wide range from 30,000, if you believe that, all the way up to 2 million. All the independent organizations were toward the larger size at the 1 million or above budget level. So going on to finding one, we asked the presenters about different aspects of their programs and broader community that might have changed or stayed the same. What you see in blue here are the organizations that felt that item had changed, and in gray you see those that had stayed the same. Overall, in this study, the presenters seem to have experienced substantial change. And this was, by the way, over a 5-year period. So you can see these changes reflected in the demographics, not only of their community, but of their audiences, in the zoning of their neighborhoods, in their political climates, and other kinds of surfaces that have had conflicts that had surfaced, as well as opportunities, and definitely other aspects of the environment. So what were those changes that they had experienced in more nuanced forms? Well, a lot of them talked about demographics. They told some pretty involved stories of how those changes in demographics influenced their environments. They spoke most commonly of changes ethnically in the diversification of the communities around them. They talked about how they had observed an increasingly transient nature of some of their newer populations, and that despite those shifts, there were persistent challenges that remained for all of them, but particularly in rural locations. Now, I do want to stop here and say rural does not only mean the South, it means out west as well. And you see a quote here reflecting the fact that one organization was sharing a contrast of being in a rural suburb and having a large...
It's not walking distance, but it's just, it's road right out here. You go across the road and drive down it one way. And it's on the right. Yeah, you're going to the gift shop.
I think we might have somebody not on mute, but I'm just going to try to talk over them a little bit. So the next area was gentrification, and presenters talked about how industry changes had led to gentrification. They were seeing that reflected in 4 different areas of tourism and farming and industry and housing. And this comment was made by one of our speakers today, and I will leave it to that speaker in a moment to expound upon this. But we'll go on to say that audiences and attendance was also an area of change. Well, actually, I should say, despite the demographic changes in the broader communities, there was some stasis in audiences remaining primarily older and white. And there was some accompanying concern that these audiences might dwindle over time. There was consistent concern about reaching the younger generations and the ways in which some of the presenters self-assessed that they felt their communities were segregated in other ways other than ethnically, and that they were serving only certain parts of their communities. And you see this comment at the bottom, which I thought captured a lot of what others said, which is that profoundly as the population is changing, our audiences are not matching that change. So going on to a little more about the community environments, probably the most commonly discussed topic was the political climates, broadly speaking. This was not only in rural areas, many of which have liberal enclaves within them, either within colleges or for other reasons, but it was in cities that might have a little bit more liberal leanings. And there were some striking differences politically. There was some emergent, well, maybe I should say re-emerging conservatism. There were people not only in the South, but out West who had seen people driving around with Confederate flags on trucks. There was some concern among some presenters of being careful in programming. Yet for other presenters, particularly those that might be in more liberal areas, desire to create a place where differing political beliefs could gather together. And so at this point, I will turn to our speakers, Lynn Creamer and Joshua Steele, and ask you to share your impressions on anything that has been discussed so far. Just a reminder to unmute.
Sure, this is Josh. I can start. So we're in a bit of a unique situation. I work for actually a property developer in Cincinnati that's responsible for a lot of the renovation we've seen here in a neighborhood called Over the Rhine. And in addition to developing properties and redeveloping this historic neighborhood, in the same spirit of sort of creating place in the urban core, they've taken on the operation of several of what they call civic spaces. So we operate Fountain Square, which is downtown Cincinnati, as well as Washington Park, and then my facility, Memorial Hall, which is the company's first indoor seated venue. And we reopened after a renovation that completed in 2016. We're a 556-seat theater. And one of our strongest motivations, I think, was to engage the direct community. There was a very diverse and sort of economically challenged population in the neighborhood, and we see that changing as the neighborhood continues to be gentrified. That's a double-edged sword, of course. You have more economic investment, but people also get pushed out. And so we've really struggled to reach those audiences that represent the neighborhood in our immediate vicinity. But by the same token, it's also easier to sell that ticket to your traditional arts audiences, which tend to be older and white and more economically advantaged. So we're always struggling to figure out what that balance is and where to best put our dollar, especially when financial situation is tough.
Thank you for that. Let's go now to Lynn.
Hi, everybody. So Carnegie Hall is a performing arts center and education center located in southeastern West Virginia. We serve a 5-county region that is contained in about 3,500 square miles, and the total population in those thousands of square miles is 95,000 people. We have a 420-seat auditorium, 3 galleries that rotate exhibits, 2 permanent exhibits. We have a very large education program, 7 full-time people and 2 part-time people. And our community is progressive. Lewisburg is a town of 3,500 people, but the rest of the region and the state is conservative. We have issues with transportation. We're very rural. It's winding mountain roads loaded with deer at night. So a lot of folks just don't even want to come out after dark. We are 1 mile from the interstate. We're an hour west of Lexington, Virginia, and an hour east of Beckley, West Virginia on Interstate 64. So there is easy access, but in those different directions, there's nothing between here and there. So transportation is, again, a big issue.
It's just interesting already to hear the contrast in locations and access to programming, and how transportation is just so contrasting in cities, and Lynn, the location that you're in. So let's go to organizational environments, from the broader community to organizations now. And so looking at those areas using the same grid, the same blue bars to indicate change, we asked what aspect of organizations had changed and what had remained the same, and found that an even higher proportion of organizations face change within their within their organizations and their overall communities. And so some of the areas of change that they talked to was definitely leadership itself and leadership transition. And overall, the independent presenters seem to be faring better in aligning leadership or dealing with leadership changes than in general, the organizations that were based in the larger institutions you saw on that initial pie chart. And what was happening with the colleges and universities was that anytime there was a change, it had more dramatic impacts and felt seismic for the larger institutions or staffs that had to change accordingly with those leadership changes. The second area was financial. In a similar way, there was this very lucky small handful of presenters that weren't overly concerned about their finances. I needed to ask them more to understand what it means to be not worried about money. But they said when they were part of their larger institutions, such as government or for one of them, a college, is that the difference was made up in their line item. I'm going to make a broad assumption that that's not most of you on this webinar. So for those of you who are here that don't have that luxury, there was a bit of a split between presenters that operate within colleges and government-owned buildings and could still be at the whims of those administration for funding cuts, and independent organizations that were generally faring better financially. It does not mean to imply that it's easy for those organizations, but perhaps there was more autonomy that allowed them to, in some ways, fulfill, write their own destiny a little more readily. Now, when you get to programming, what's interesting was that there were no real patterns that emerged. There was such a wide range of art forms and approaches that were reflected in the comments of the presenters. And what they did share was this strong desire to reach younger audiences or to better reach the ethnic diversity of their communities, or maybe both. And there was also a shared sense that the successful programming efforts generally related to partnerships, and we'll get into partnerships more in just a minute. And with that, we'll go to Lynn and Joshua for your comments in this area.
So we, Carnegie Hall, have gone through 3.5 years of pretty big staff changes. We got a new executive director. We had our marketing director leave. We had our development director leave. We had box office volunteer people. We just had everybody. Big exodus happen. And it was very destabilizing for a couple of years. Happily, things have stabilized, and we have a good team right now. The other thing that was going on during those 3 years was the change in funding. We got a new governor who just took out all funding for the arts, for public radio, for public broadcasting in his proposed budget. Just as our new executive director came on board, we took a huge hit in state funding. My programming budget went down about 25%. But happily, the state has a arts advocacy group, and we have been able to gain back some of those dollars. But of course, all of that impacted our programming.
Okay. And Josh, what was your experience?
Well, we, as I mentioned, we're part of a larger organization. Our operating budget is right around 1.8 million this year. We have 4 full-time staff, a couple of part-time staff. We have an interesting situation in that we share resources with this larger organization. So all of our hourly staff that, work custodial and bartending and technicians and things like that, we pull them from a roster of shared between these other sites as well. So that has its advantages. However, sort of a performing arts center, it was a new concept to this business. They had not sold tickets anywhere before, or they weren't used to buying pricey talent. They weren't used to maintaining an indoor facility, and so there's a large learning curve, and there still is, to the point where we operate on 90% earned income. So we don't have any individual giving. We get some grants, but not many, and we struggle in that area because of this association with, this large organization. So, I think there's still an opportunity there in terms of, getting more of that under income fundraising and sponsorship. But we're doing the best we can to maximize tickets sold and concessions revenue.
Thank you. And I popped back up to an earlier slide to hit on an important point that I'm sorry I glossed over here, which was this theme of wearing multiple hats and being chronically understaffed. And that seemed to be true across the board, particularly for the smaller organizations. And you certainly heard that reflected in Lynn's comments, and as well as one of the speakers out, or the interviewees out west, said, I am the front of the house. My phone number on my cell phone is where you call for tickets. And that seemed to sum up a lot. So going on now to the area of audience engagement, using the same thing of blue and gray, we've got two bar graphs here. On the left, we asked the presenters, the 19 presenters, if they offer those types of audience engagement activities. And on the right, we asked them if they had experienced challenges in changes in offering them. And for some of them, they decided not to offer them because of the challenges they experienced. And what you see here, generally speaking, is that most of the presenters had experimented and tried, if not were currently offering most of the type of activities, particularly school programs, but also pre and post show events and activities and other formats. Most of them offer free programming of some type. Most of them offer something off-site. Most of them take advantage of partners and partnerships to help encourage attendance and increase the quality of their programs. Most of them engage in diversity efforts. And a few of them have tried some other approaches. So, but what they talked most about was the school programs and some challenges, and let's look a little bit at what those are. Well, for about half of them, the school events, they've been doing them for a long time. They go fine as planned. But the other half really struggled to nail down schedules, to nail down people within school systems with whom they can collaborate to confirm events, and the ever-present challenge of teaching to the test and the challenges of that school systems themselves face to incorporate arts activities into the school day with all the pressures they have on them academically. So regarding pre and post show events, there was a split in opinions.
Sure, just so I know what's going on, but I'm not checking your work. I just want to, if so-and-so calls me, I'm like,
was that they were too labor intensive, also that the audience size and was
Oh, did you make copies?
And there was a small but
you do everything digital.
Presenters that voiced strong objections.
Yeah, let's make a copy down.
Though it was a very small number, they felt that maybe the commentary wasn't as interesting, maybe people didn't attend, or some of them faced other logistical kinds of challenges. And I know Lynn might have some interesting things to say about that. And before we turn to our speakers, just to offer a few more opinions here, a real passionate divide between free events, between presenters who felt like they were great and they wanted to prioritize them and value them, and others that felt like, attendance just isn't good when the event is free. And then finally, partnerships. This was where probably some of the most interesting and passionate discussions came up around the political environments and partnerships, and the interest in taking risks to help generate and connect with new audiences. And they told great stories the organizations did a
Thank you.
match the interests of social service agency and nonprofits around them, everything from church
APAC.
to immigration-related organizations, to specific communities and programming coming in, and also for the colleges and universities, definitely
Right. Top
they
piece of-
developed academic departments and sometimes scholars. But the bottom line that a lot of them came back to was, but this is labor intensive. So you go back to some of Lynn's
Probably early next
well
week is my guess right
what was
now.
said
I wanted
about
us to all get through this grant stuff.
and it was hard for them to pull off
All right.
partnerships.
All right.
Sometimes just not
Thanks,
possible
William.
for small staffs. So with that, we will turn to our speakers.
Okay. One of the things that we do that really has been a cornerstone of our audience development is indeed partnerships. We have a program that we call curated partnerships, which you could think of as like our resident ensembles. So these are groups that we reached out to prior to the building opening. We create sort of a custom financial arrangement to bring them into the space. And it's a nice two-way street. It helps us, build our ticketing database and get quality work into the space. And it helps them to get into a beautiful historic auditorium, centrally located at a price that makes sense for their organization. One particular partnership that I wanted to highlight is our work with Cincinnati Shakespeare Company. We are really lucky to have a large professional Shakespeare company for a mid-sized town, and they do a really exciting program called Project 38. On an annual basis, they engage high school and middle schools from across the region who collectively perform the entire canon of Shakespeare's 38 works through performance and dance and films and things like that. So that's 4 solid days for us of school kids coming in and offering programming that's free and open to the public. So it's a really exciting way for us to be open to the community and engage with the schools. Additionally, we also sort of straddle that fence where we have a family series that includes 7 free educational programs on Saturdays every year. And then we also have a paid component to that. So when we bring in the pricier national tours that have a bit more production value, those will have a ticket price, albeit one that's just $14. So that family series is an opportunity where we find to really effectively reach out to the community. And I'm happy to say that attendance has been really strong. So we're really excited about where we are there.
And Lynn,
Yes, yeah. So we have a lot of different partnerships, but our 2 main partnerships are with the main one is with the Board of Education in Greenbrier County. We have multiple educational programs that we bring to the schools in terms of putting teaching artists in the classrooms. And then we have a program where we bring the younger students, the K through 5 students to Carnegie Hall for a live performance every year. So for a lot of these kids, it's the first time they're out of their community. Their small little community in the middle on the western end. We used to then take the performers to the middle and high schools, but that has become basically impossible with the scheduling that the schools have now. We also partnered with the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame to be a satellite exhibit space. Charleston is about 2 hours from us, and that's where the Hall of Fame headquarters is. And as a result of that partnership, we co-produce and present here at the Hall 2 programs a year to the our patrons in this region, so that some of the activities that are going on in the state capitol are now brought over to the eastern end of the state, or the southeastern end of the state. We tried pre and post show events, audience development programs. And it just, that didn't work. People really didn't want to come to an event 3 hours before the show and wait for the show to start, because we are a very small town and there isn't that much to fill those 3 hours. And then after the show, everybody just wants to get home because, as I mentioned, the road, it's very windy, it's very hilly, it's very mountainous. And West Virginia is the highest #1 state for deer and vehicle encounters. So what we did, and I learned this from a Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation's Jazz Touring Network colleague, we started doing a Q&A before the second set of performance. And that way, the audience had a chance to experience the performer, and they were engaged with that performer in a conversation before the second set. And that has just been wildly popular. And so that's how we've been able to kind of make that work for us. We do offer free programming. We always keep our ticket prices low because there is such a high rate of poverty in this area, in the state. But we do offer 6 free summer outdoor programs. And we will have hundreds of people on the lawn.
Mm-hmm. So yet again, a big contrast. And Lynn, I remember the point when we were talking, when you started talking about the situation with the deer and the long drives. And that's really a very important and contrasting set of circumstances with some of the other presenters. So I think the great thing about the design of this study and the openness of the people who were part of the group and individual interviews was just having the chance to share those multiple contexts, which make up the field. So going on to assumptions. So this was an interesting question too. What we asked was we asked the presenters how they felt their peers tended to describe them, and they asked them what they felt those descriptions or assumptions missed or things that were misunderstood. And in essence, what they felt their peers needed to know about them. And so what it boiled down to in the end were about 2 things across all 19 voices was, number one, they had some concern about agents maybe not fully understanding their needs within booking and also their cost structures. They felt that generally speaking, not in every situation, definitely not with every agent or booking, but there was a general tendency to pitch artists that were either too expensive or maybe not quite a good match with the presenter's market or their budget. So you see that quote there in blue about understanding the dynamic from our end, and our speakers will have some things to share about this in the middle. And this, in a minute I'm ending. The second one is this notion of small and mighty, which became a bit of a theme. Throughout a theme of camaraderie among the focus groups, which is the sense that presenters were operating with limited capacity, but yet they're always doing a lot in presenting programs of quality. And for them, what small meant was doing a lot with a little, wearing multiple hats across maintaining so many different staff functions. And as you see this comment from one of them, is we can make $1 go further than anybody else. And the sense of mightiness came from the range of abilities that they had to manage their budgets and present events and navigate challenges and connect with and genuinely know their communities. And so with that, I would shift to our speakers here for their perspectives. Lynn, let's start with you.
Sure. I have found that I have to be really clear with agents about who we are, about what our budget capacity is, about what our community is, where we are. I have had experiences where one artist, one performer, were just outraged that they could not get a direct flight to us. It takes a good day to get here, no matter where you're coming from, unless you're coming from, you know, Richmond or something. But it's a big trip to get here. So I have to make sure that the agents understand really where we are. And at the same time, I find if I can get the artists to understand where they are coming, they have wonderful experiences, and it really opens their eyes and minds to possibilities. We had one artist come here, and a year after he was here, he wrote a book that was set in our county. And to me, he was deeply impacted by his experience here.
Mm-hmm. And Josh, what about you?
Yeah, agents, huh? You know, what's frustrating for me sometimes, I was thinking about this webinar. I just had a call with an agent a couple days ago, you know, and they call and say, well, you know, our ask for this artist is 25,000. Well, I mean, you know, do the math. We're a 556 seat house. You know, if I paid you asking price and then 5,000 in expenses, I need to pull $60 net out of each patron. And, you know, it's not Paul McCartney, it's, you know, a sort of mid-level act. So, you know, I think just having the courtesy to do just a smidge of homework before making calls would be helpful. You know, we also, I'm sure many of us on the call use Polestar. It's a very useful resource, especially for the touring concert market, but, you know, it's not comprehensive. And, you know, there are plenty of times when I end up asking the agents for tour history from, you know, say I'm in Cincinnati, say I see they've played, you know, Louisville or Columbus or Cleveland, and I ask for box office history. You know, boy, it'd be great if they were, you know, up to date on that and held that or didn't give a coy answer. And I think we all have a lot to do and a lot of dates to book, and I'd like if we can cut to the chase a little bit quicker.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go on to needs, our final area. About half, before we get to this, about half politely but firmly wanted to send a message to arts presenters that the annual conference is a little cost prohibitive for them, a little on the expensive side. They find ways to make it happen, or some of them don't. Some of them go to the regional conferences. But once they got on to needs beyond that, there really were three main things. The first was, I'm going to use this word cohort broadly, but some way for like-sized presenters to meet and share information and discuss issues and maybe even work together to solve common problems. It might be in person, it might be online, it might be a series of small groups, but something where they could maybe offset some of the sense of isolation they feel and having to do everything on their own with their left brain talking to their right brain. The second thing was, and in a way this relates to the first one, is they wanted to be able to brainstorm and explore new ideas for engagement strategies that would work for their peers and other communities, as well as for presenters in like-minded communities. One of the people you see here, a comment in a community college, said, I really want to get students off their phones and into the theater to experience something new. There's nothing like a live performance, and we have this window of time with them when they're at college to help foster that experience. One for in a rural an environment wanted the sense of cohort more rural, and then another presenter in a more urban area, it talked about better communicating the value of the performance. We really hoped and wished that arts presenters might be able to advocate for their value, and that was one of the recommendations, which is coming up in a minute. But I do want to stop here for this quote because it was made by a presenter who had worked in a very large organization and now was in a very rural organization in Central Plains. And this person said, if the large organization I worked for disappeared, it would be a blip on the radar. But if my small organization disappeared, it would be a huge loss to the community. And that is why I want to tell our stories. Thus the sense of small and mighty, of being the only act in town sometimes. in terms of presenting within rural environments. And so, Lynn and Josh, Lynn, could you start first again, just because I know that you are one of the small games in your town.
Yes, I 100% agree with what that presenter said about if their small organization disappeared, it would be the same here in Lewisburg. Carnegie Hall is an icon in this town. It is the cultural center of this town, and it would be a devastating blow on so many different levels to the community and the region if we were to disappear. I really do feel like it would be helpful to rural presenters to be able to come together as in a smaller meeting. But I also really want to encourage all of the organizations that help us to really go visit your rural communities that you are serving and that you're trying to create opportunities for. Because until you're really here, there's just no way to describe what it's like to be as rural as we are.
Thank you for that. I know after we talked, I definitely wanted to get on a plane and probably in an automobile as well and visit you, because I know you stressed that being there's no.
It would take both. A plane, and an automobile.
Plane and automobile. Josh, what about you?
Well, in a more urban situation, we have an awful lot of competition, and it's interesting, that thing about if the small arts organization went away, what an impact it would be. We have this interesting thing where this building, the building Memorial Hall, it was built in 1908 by a famous Cincinnati architect. It's really an amazing work of architecture and art on the inside. So it deserved to be saved. It deserves to be programmed. And yet, coming into a mature urban market where there's a lot of competition, I'm always asking myself, if I book X, Y, or Z artist, would they not have booked elsewhere, right, in the market? And so from sort of a nonprofit mission-based perspective, we want to be careful that we're adding value to the community and not just, moving pieces around to serve our budget, if that makes sense. So,
right.
It's sort of, as we all deal with, it's that balance between, mission and putting a budget together.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to go to the recommendations just for a second here. We do have some questions that have come in. I want to be sure we get to them. These recommendations are works in progress for arts presenters. I do have good news on the first one. Out of the smaller study, there was an interest internally at administering a larger scale study to test and see if the smaller, or if the observations that were made in the smaller study that you've heard about today hold true for the more organizations in our country, if any more definitive conclusions could be drawn. And that study is happening as we speak this year and next. The idea of a cohort and tracks for smaller mid-sized presenters is being looked at by arts presenters, and Krista's going to join us in a second and might want to speak to that. Krista, maybe you can join us now.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so these recommendations were great and certainly provided some much inspiration and energy for APAP to be responsive. Some of the things that have already taken place include having a small and mid-sized affinity group at Conference 2019, which Joe Clifford, who's on the call, helped to organize and facilitate, and looking at how we can continue to hold that again at next year at the conference, but also how do we have a year-round affinity group networking that's happening. So we're working on that and working with a small group of people to help make that happen. We hear that access is challenging. We just offered a special initiative for new small and mid-sized presenters to join APAP at a reduced fee, as well as attend the conference at a reduced fee, but that ended yesterday. So, but we did have a number of people take advantage of it, and it's a pilot that we're looking at exploring how to make use of for the future. And then sharing the stories and raising the visibility, we really take to heart. This past Inside Arts just did a whole article on small and mid-sized presenters. We're looking at other articles to feature small and mid-sized presenters on a regular basis in Inside Arts, as well as just making sure that the programming at conference features those voices and stories in our programming. I'm also happy to share that our 5 Minutes to Shine program that we've offered in the past, which is a session that highlights audience and community engagement for the field, will be focused strictly on small and mid-sized presenters for this next year. So we're super excited to really shine a light on them.
That's great. I didn't know about the 5 Minutes to Shine. That's wonderful. Well,
Yes.
great. Thank you. Boy, that's a lot of progress fast. So good on you all. So, and we have a couple of questions that have come in. I do want to just mention a comment by one of our attendees that membership and conference fee was helpful in allowing them to participate already. So our first question is from Morgiana Celeste Vericchio, who says, we all know that a big challenge to building audiences is posed by the at-home streaming services. Lynn or Josh, any ideas about practices and marketing or promotion that you've used to address that issue? Or maybe Krista, anything that you've heard about?
You know, I think, at least in the concert industry, we've actually seen a slight expansion in attendance at live performances, especially festivals. You know, I think it seems like nationally there's a changing relationship people have with their music, at least. This doesn't apply to Netflix per se, but, you know, because, you know, people don't buy records and CDs anymore, you know, streaming seems like such a shallow degree of engagement with music and artists. And so, you know, to really have a connection with it, I think the industry is seeing more people buy tickets to sort of deepen that relationship that used to exist by, you know, buying the record and playing it 10 times in your living room.
And Lynn, can I just ask, I know that one of the things you mentioned was that dial-up is common in West Virginia.
Right.
So I wonder if streaming is an issue for you or not.
I'm sure it's not as nearly an issue for us as it is for people in urban areas. And I have to say, we haven't seen our ticket sales drop over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years because of streaming. So I really don't think that impacts us to the degree it does an urban presenter.
Okay. And then we have another question from Amy Wagliardo. Hope I didn't just ruin your name. And you say, Amy, that you do a lot of film programming, and that adding to the event in some way helps people come out and give it a try. By adding, you mean a talk back by somebody involved in the film, or maybe a local film professor, maybe a dress-up night or food and drink, those kinds of things. And you also have partnered with other organizations. So let's see. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I guess there wasn't maybe a comment here, but more of an offer that these kinds of add-on engagement activities have worked for you. Josh or Lynn, do you have any experiences to share around film or ancillary activities that were added to film, or other engagement activities that weren't mentioned so far?
We had a film series that we have discontinued. We discontinued, and we were part of the on-screen in-person program through Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation for a couple of years. We also discontinued that. We just found that attendance to those events dwindled to where, I mean, sometimes we would have 5 people in the audience, and it just wasn't doable. And with on-screen in person, that was with the filmmaker being in attendance to talk about the film. That, I think, that's definitely where streaming would impact us, just or even, you know, Netflix and through the mail can which you can still do.
Yeah. Suzanne, can I chime in here? It's Krista.
Oh, please do.
So I just wanted to share, as I was a former presenter for a small organization that was $1.5 million and a programming budget of about $250,000. And we also were part of On Screen in Person with Lynn, but we found that film series was a great way for new people to find their way to the organization because of the film topics that would often inspire partnerships or community engagement events around that. So if it were something around the deaf poetry slam community, we found it great to be able to connect with the deaf community and feature some deaf poetry slammers as part of the pre-show filming, or, you know, whatever that topic was. So I would just say, since Amy also had experience with film, sometimes it can, for some people, can open up great programming opportunity to reach new people and bring people together for a sense of community around an issue that they find meaningful.
And I'd just like to add, I mean, this is a perfect example of rural versus urban programming, because we don't have a deaf community that we could reach out to in that way. We're just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
totally.
don't have a college or a university or any of that. So, and it was a great program, and there was one film that really hit for our region that we actually use as an audience development tool quite frequently now.
That's great.
Okay, well, Krista, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Arts presenters officially here, with great thanks to Lynn and Josh.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you, Suzanne, too, for your fine work with the formative study. And we're really looking forward to how the next phase of this wider study what the next phase will yield. I want to thank you all so much for joining us on today's webinar, and another thank you to the speakers, Lynn and Joshua and Suzanne. APAP's monthly webinar series will continue in September with a special APAP NYC conference series with webinars for our first-time conference attendees, as well as a webinar about getting the most out of your APAP membership. So check back on the website for more information regarding this series. Finally, we'll be sending out a brief survey about this webinar today to our participants. We'd appreciate your feedback or on your experience, as well as any insight or suggestions that you have for future webinar conference issues. So that's all from us. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope you will join us again soon. Have a great day.